The Solana gaming supercycle has arrived. Only the strongest players will carve their name in history on-chain. More than 30 legendary games await, each a battlefield, each a chance to rise. It's time to prove yourself in the arena. Join now.
Compute Capital Markets, CCM. We are live talking about CCM, and it's not Creator Capital Markets. So whoever's telling you it's Creator Capital Markets, let them know right now. Cut it out. Cut it out. It's Compute Capital Markets. John, how you doing? And talk to us. CCM is coming. It's finally here. And it's one of those concepts, man, that is finally starting to hit really a lot of the socials, but hit in what it actually means, right? People across the timeline, I've seen it, like it's all front end right now, all across most projects in crypto. And then you look at the back end and it's like, hey, man, this is all pretty centralized. Wait, I thought we were in decentralization, blockchain, tech, and all this stuff. How come no one's been able to tackle this? So Compute Capital Markets, I'm excited to talk to you, but how are you doing?
Jorge, thank you for having me back. I think this will be a fun conversation for the audience here because we usually talk about games, but we can kind of maybe lift up the veil and look at like how games are built behind the scenes, what screws people up, how we can just help people like focus on the fun of games instead of, frankly, the boring shit that you end up having to do if you build this stuff yourself. So we do the boring part. But there is kind of an exciting part of it, which changes it for everybody. So did you have an app go offline last week because AWS?
You mean yesterday too, right? Because I mean, it went down yesterday.
I was going to go through a whole succession. Last week, yesterday, Azure went down, AWS went down again. We've all experienced this, right? Like I couldn't do my Instacart order. My bank account wasn't letting me log in. Like it
couldn't play games, man.
Sidebar though, who didn't go down? Solana didn't go down, right? So Solana is such a decentralized network that they actually walk the talk, right? So a lot of layer 2 blockchains actually went down because they claim to be decentralized, but it's just a bunch of AWS servers running their validator nodes. So Solana, for the criticisms it's gotten in the past, like this is not an issue today. Like it is a really decentralized blockchain. And I posted about this yesterday. Like I get asked this question all the time by investors and people, everyone from like, people that are just looking at the token up to venture capital funds that want to look at millions. I'm always asked like, why Solana? So I just put my thoughts together yesterday and put that out there. And Solana Foundation was nice enough to retweet it and share that with everybody. That was nice of them. But there's a lot of reasons. We don't have to get into that right now. But the whole point of Compute Capital Markets that you've teed up is to turn compute into an asset class is kind of the simplest way to put it. So computers can sit there on the internet, and you can think of these computers as essentially generators or factories for compute cycles, right? It's not about renting computers. It's about the generative potential in terms of the compute that they put out. Kind of like if you have a solar panel and you attach it to the energy grid, and now you can earn money from the grid because you own a solar panel. Similar thing. Now, the energy grid is not decentralized like computer networks are. It does have a market for energy though. So it's almost complementary. Like for the world of compute, we're very decentralized, or at least we can be decentralized, but there is not a effective market for compute. But blockchain is really the enabler of that. To do it well, you have to stream out little bits of capacity. It shouldn't just be about like renting computers on the internet and provisioning at the computer level. It's actually about streaming compute to an application that scales up and scales down according to whatever it needs. And that's the underlying architecture of Beamable, is to lead the way in compute capital markets on Solana, because of all those reasons I posted about yesterday that just makes Solana particularly well suited for the capital structure around this. But we can bring it back to games, Jorge. Like, what is the most spiky, hard, complicated demand that exists online? It's games. Like, there's not a lot of things other than games where suddenly 1 million people can show up and want to play that game. And a lot of game developers, by the way, have literally done everything right. They made a popular game, they marketed it, they got the people to show up, and then they went out of business because the game actually couldn't operate at scale. And that's a real shame. So that is one problem that we are just really hyped about over at Beamable, because we never want to see that happen. And we also want to give people more runway, more capital efficiency in their businesses by saving them money on compute. And then beyond that, eliminate these single points of failure that occur, like we've all seen this week with Azure and AWS, like we saw last week with AWS. And there's not even really anything wrong with those guys, by the way. Like, they operate millions of servers. It's really complicated. They offer an amazing service to a lot of companies that are building on that. And we should never expect that everybody operates with 100% uptime. That's not actually achievable. There's basically no technology that does that. But if we structure it differently, we take it out of the realm of these what they call hyperscalers, which are basically massive computation silos where you sign up and you use their computers and then you build your application on top of it. If we move it out of that and turn it into a protocol on the internet where the compute is streamed, packaged as an asset, using market forces to price it, because you now have an order book where the suppliers of compute say, well, this is what I'm willing to charge for compute. And then you have people that are building applications and games that say, here's what I'm willing to pay for compute. The order book matches it together. The application consumes the compute, scales up to whatever number of customers it needs, and is willing to pay for. And that's really the way I think compute should function in the future, which is compute just works like the internet, instead of being all of these data centers that you have to set up specialized agreements, long-term arrangements, and all that. By the way, blockchain is so great for this because you can put everything on chain. You can put the order book on chain. You can put the what they call SLAs, service level agreements, on chain, where people make actual on-chain commitments. You can put the reputation data online that records how they've actually performed over time. Like, have these nodes performed with 99.9% uptime, which is what most game developers are going to want to see for their backends. So it's a really exciting future, and that's what we're launching in really just a couple of weeks. So we got our token launch around the corner, and then the protocol will go live, and we've got a roadmap taking us, for quite some time down the road of how we can help game developers build better games, have more runway, and just focus on the fun. Really, is what it comes down to. Game developers should focus on what's fun in their game, because you really only have one major competitive advantage in a game development effort relative to any other game, and that's you got to be the most fun game for a particular audience. And if you can do that, you can engage that audience and you can succeed. Everything that distracts you from that is value subtracted. Top of that list would be having a bunch of network engineers and back-end server developers write a bunch of code on the back end that you are simply the 10,000th version of that same code rewrite. Like, that should be off the shelf.
Look, a lot there to unpack, and I have like 3 different ways that I would want to take the conversation. I'll start first with the Solana tweet that you had yesterday. Yeah. One that definitely caught my eye. I think it was actually, yesterday. That really caught my eye. But one of the things that, like, I think everything you wrote makes sense, and I get it, I understand it. But I think one thing that was missing, and it's missing with a lot of people that when they tell me they choose Solana, the time and date they chose Solana, to me, is always the biggest thing. Because if you chose Solana, let's just say this was a year ago, year and a half ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, man, it's easy to choose Solana today. It's so easy to choose Solana today. It's all over the news. Everything's happening. We're seeing everyone building on Solana. We're seeing people migrate to Solana. But anybody that had conviction a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that date and time for them to say, man, I am going to take this risk. I am going to take this opportunity that I see with all these other decentralized blockchains that exist that had kind of very much the similar story, kind of that narrative. But there was something about Solana that we've always had since day one. And that's always been very much the community here that has been really saying the same thing. But even bigger than that was been the developers that have been building on Solana for quite some time have always been very, very, very vocal about the loyalty to Solana and why they believed in Solana. And I think you really chose, hey, Solana with, hey, the cost, the volume, if compute capital markets work, kind of like ICM works, kind of like CCM works and all that stuff, this is all really kind of, but the time and date that you chose Solana, to me is the biggest question to you is like, how do you make such a conviction with such a large project that, hey, ultimately, if the chain itself cannot help this idea, this project, it ultimately could fail. It ultimately could just take everything that you kind of worked for and go just again back to square one. How does that decision, how do you make that decision? How do you get to that decision?
Well, the honest answer is we kind of chose each other, but we've been deep into Solana for quite some time. I can't even remember when I bought Solana token. It feels like 5 years ago, something around that timeline. It was early 2020 when we were all just sitting around in the pandemic, locked up, and I spent a few months just becoming a degen and signing up for every DeFi application and seeing how terrible the Ethereum-based experiences were, where you're paying ridiculous gas fees and you wouldn't get finality for your transaction for like an hour. That was my original degen / DeFi experience. So, then I discovered Solana and it was like, wow, this actually works. Like, I actually have liquidity. I can move in and out of positions. I can use these apps. It basically happens right away. And that was parallel to the kickoff of Beamable, because like that same year where, if you remember all the way back, DeFi summer of 2020 is like when I discovered Solana. It was kind of parallel to that I was also getting Beamable off the ground, and we were, focused on launching the tech platform, but we basically had 3 customers at that time. It was like Alpha Code and just people that we knew really, really well, willing to build on top of us. So started to get going that. Fast forward maybe a couple of years, I forget the exact time frame. I think it's 22, but I do remember the meeting vividly where we're on Zoom and Tolly was in the room listening to the pitch for Beamable and what I wanted to do and how I wanted to make it easier for game developers to get on chain, really to build any kind of game. But for the blockchain sector of the universe, we wanted to just make that more of a drag and drop, like software developer experience in the tools people use in Unity and Unreal Engine, and just make Solana like very native to that so that you didn't have to even think about blockchain integration. And Tolly was really interested in figuring out how do you just onboard more developers. And I think that's kind of one of the consistent themes you're pointing to, Jorge, which is Solana has been a very developer first ecosystem all through this. And now we see the fruits of that, which is so many applications, so many dApps, so many Beamables, so many new formations of capital markets now emerging. That's the developer first mentality. And I can tell you that we talked to pretty much every chain in 22, every gaming chain. A bunch of them have now been forgotten to history. But we talked to them all. And one of the consistent themes was, first of all, you could divide the world roughly into chains that would just dole out grants to like people to build a game, but didn't want to help those developers in any way build their game faster, be more successful at it. And I don't understand the mentality behind it, but we ran into that all the time. That wasn't the experience with Solana. There was a very clear recognition that if gaming was going to become a market that could be built on Solana, then we have to support developers and we have to give them SDKs and tooling that gets them there fast. So for people who are like coming at this from the standpoint of gaming and are not game developers themselves, what that meant at Beamable is we were developing an SDK that fits into the main tools that developers use. And we have 3 of them. We have a Unity SDK, we have an Unreal Engine SDK, and we have a web browser gaming SDK. And that covers the vast majority of the universe of games that can be created. But the point of it is when you download that SDK, everything from Solana integration to multiplayer, like data storage, is just out of the box. We essentially give those capabilities to the engine that you want to use without learning new programming languages and things like that. So, we were mutually selected. I was familiar with Solana from a performance standpoint, which really blew me away when I first experienced it. But then it was that developer ecosystem piece that took place, and Solana invested in the company really early on. And I guess they liked the idea because we had a lot of work to do 3 years ago, by the way. Like it's still, really the start to really scale out from games getting on the platform probably only really became significant like the beginning of last year when we started to see game after game starting to ship on the platform. It just takes time to develop anything around games, but they shared the vision, they got in, they've been very kind to us, and we're happy for their support. And we're pleased to be part of the ecosystem.
Yeah. Shifting over though to the BMB network and to the BMB, like you just mentioned a little bit though about Solana and the speed and again the infrastructure that's being built and the developers on there. But what it was needed for BMB to be able to survive or build or to be built was again a lot of what you just mentioned here. But switching that over to the BMB, the launch of that, the aspect that I'm understanding now or looking to understand now is the not to say the economy, the utility, but the token itself is going to allow for the game development infrastructure of the CCM that we're talking about here in many ways. From, is it compute credits, like governance, staking? Is it like, a broader way for people to be able to interact, but even more for game developers to interact, to have a way for them to, let's just say, have the back end be supported in a way that they make sense or make sense for game development, but also for you guys. So maybe give us that like 411 on that, the TLDR on it, the explainer video on it.
So there's a lot that we want to do with it, but so I'm going to kind of lay out kind of the big picture, at least with respect to gaming. We learned a lot by being part of the Solana ecosystem and really being all about developers, which for us is the game developers, but also the other people who build components that game developers use, things that are add-ons to the network. So we always thought in terms of this highly composable ecosystem. What we're building with Beamable is essentially a node network, number one, where people can have computers that contribute either the actual computation for running a game. It's basically, if you're familiar with a game server, think of all these game servers online that get activated and can be utilized by the game so that they have immediate capacity so you can play them. Alongside of that, though, is not just our code, it's all of the things that you can run on top of it. So we give people this SDK, which gives them access to a lot of immediate kind of redundant functionality that you need when building a game. But a huge part of our vision is just create that ecosystem where finally game developers and people who build game tech have a consistent ecosystem where the interfaces, the data specifications are the same across the board. It supports any chain you want, by the way. Like the DPIN runs on Solana, but if people want to build a game that's for any other chain, that's totally fine too. We don't want to tell people what they can or can't do, including, by the way, that most of the market is not on chain. Like we have a $200 billion game industry where most of the customers here are not going to be building blockchain games, at least probably not for a while. So, it requires an ecosystem where we don't build everything. Same kind of Solana mentality. Could you imagine if like Solana had to do absolutely everything from DEXs to DeFi to game SDKs to you name it? Like they would be overwhelmed by the number of things you'd have to build. Instead, they've crowdsourced that to the community. And that's the same mentality that we're bringing to the table by being open source, but also open network. And by being an open network, what that means is the token is used to pay and provision for the access to game servers. It's the number one basic utility of it. It's also used for staking the worker nodes. Right? We have to secure the network. People, if they add a worker node, we don't want them cheating and claiming that they did work that they didn't do. So there's a staking protocol which secures the network against that. It's used for governance of new improvement protocol requests to the protocol. And then the vision also encompasses this idea of ecosystem where, in addition to that central piece of centralized operation standpoint, but like the backbone of the code that defines all the interfaces, people can build off of that, plug into it, add components. And unlike a lot of backend code today, they now have a means of monetizing it, because backend code is a little bit different than front-end code. Like, first of all, to operate it, you have to be able to provision compute for it. And when you're provisioning compute for it, you have to be able to pay for that compute. This is the base problem of like SaaS companies, which is SaaS companies have to be able to capture enough fees from use of their application to cover the underlying operational cost and then have some margin. DePIN, or compute capital markets, completely flips that, where you have a compute network that charges for the compute cycles, the what we call API calls in our network. And that's just more of a base primitive of building software that your application can consume. You build off of that. And as a solution developer, you no longer have to think about having a whole business model of your own where you sign people up, you run backend servers, you scale up for them, you capture margin. Like, you just get just like the game developers do, you focus on the solution. And what our vision is to allow those solution developers to just provision compute. And if they have a code module that people are using, again, open economy, you can say, here's a license fee that we charge you for participating. Here's a royalty on top of the underlying compute. Like, so this is what we really mean by a compute capital market. It's not only unlocking access to the compute, but unlocking all the creativity of developers out there to build on top of it, to benefit from the speedy, liquid availability of compute, so that all these software applications that initially power gaming, but ultimately can go everything else. And Jorge, in terms of direct like end user benefit, of course, there's the benefit that hopefully we all play better games, maybe even want to operate a node and be part of the gaming industry effectively, help support the industry and earn something from it. But also we envision that as part of the ecosystem, people are going to start building all kinds of consumer-facing applications as well, like game discovery things and stuff like that, that the consumer will touch. And the same token can power the compute needs of this whole ecosystem. So that's what we're building.
I think that the biggest part of it all, though, is that it's already currently got over 90 plus live games, 11 billion APIs, 2.5 million gamers and players that you guys have been working with. So this thing, like, this isn't an idea. This isn't a hey, I woke up and I want to like build this, anything like that. I think people need to know that, man, this is something that's already like battle tested, bulletproof. Like, you know, we've got this already working. We're got to already like the opposite of what Web3 has done sometimes, in the sense that let's launch a token and then hopefully let's build it. It's let's build it first and then make sure that if we're going to introduce any type of token or any of that stuff, like there's an actual added utility to why you would actually want to do something like this. And again, not financial advice with anything I'm saying, but it just, again, is the right business practices that sometimes are missed, right? And I think you and I even talked about business practices and like revenue not being something that's like a meta in Web3. And I'm like, yeah, you know, I think people forget that in a year from now, you do have to turn the lights on and you have to pay the gas bill and you have to pay payroll and all these things happen and expenses happen. And so revenue has to be something that any company that wants to launch has to be at the forefront of. How do you make revenue, but how do you make that product that you want to sell attractive? And why does it solve them? And what is it time that it solves, right? Because if you're able to solve time, man, like that's the number one thing that everybody looks for. And here we are once again building in Web3 that we know takes a lot of time, but you're able to save them time on the back-end infrastructure, on the actually aspect of live ops, something that we just even briefly talked about, of them going down. And here we are still up and running and still live. So I think that's just something massive congrats and kudos to you and your team.
Yeah, thank you. And we publish those stats. You can go to beamable.network, and right there's a live stats link. You can see exactly how many API calls are pumping through the network that we're building. I think we are moving into a stage in crypto where revenue matters. It still doesn't quite matter, but like I think the signs are there that people are starting to look for that. At least there's a cross section of people that really care about that. That said, Jorge, it's a feature of internet capital markets to allow democratized participation. So I love the idea that the crazy ideas, the huge aspirational ideas have a path to some kind of capital formation that wouldn't otherwise be available. That's awesome. Like I think we'll have some huge home runs from the fact that that's even possible. But now I think it's probably, if I think in terms of like frequency analysis or risk analysis, it's going to be like a barbell in the future. You're going to have the super aspirational, high risk things. They're just flyers, and hopefully the capital gets put to the actual use of building the problem, which more often than not, sadly, in crypto sometimes doesn't happen. That's one side. And then the other side is like people actually showing revenue traction, which really just means you're solving a problem. So if you're solving a problem, then there can be some revenue associated with it. Crypto is particularly great at turning the solution to that problem into a protocol, which means we put it out on the internet in a way that anybody can use and participate in, so such that the value exchange is more peer-to-peer rather than centralized SaaS companies where people end up spending. Kind of the same problem as in like games, right? So in gaming, people shouldn't be building backends themselves. In SaaS companies, you shouldn't be like spinning up a whole complex infrastructure to even do your app. Like so many of these things could just become a internet primitive or a protocol-based service where the value exchange is built into the protocol. So like that's kind of how I see it. A lot of stuff that's going to end up being much more revenue generating, as well as like let's never change that aspect of crypto. Like I want the door to be open for the crazy ideas as well.
Yeah. Look, I think you made me start thinking here for a second, because I think like there's a couple things that you're saying here, and it's like the normalcy to this idea of it should be normal. But even further, it made me think of one thing, like if this truly works, the idea of what this could power outside of gaming made me start thinking of internet capital markets, because you made me start thinking, what else in live ops? What else in the back end of these games? Because games, at the end of the day, are something that most or other products outside of gaming use, right? It's not much, I don't want to say much different. Yes, that is different, but what I'm talking about is infrastructure-wise here. And I'm wondering, man, the vision or the idea can be something that literally Beamable could be that bridge for many others. And I think that like now I'm starting to see a bigger picture, and I don't know if that's even in the talks, right?
Well, Jorge, you're completely onto what our vision is. So yeah, we see compute capital markets as something that has broad applicability well outside gaming. That said, here's one of the things that's always been missing in not all, but many crypto startups, which is how do you get from point A to point B? And this is sort of the boring part, the quote unquote boring, but the hard part of building a startup, which is how do we build the right concentrations around customers? How do we build funnels? How do we recruit people? What are our conversion rates? What's the customer acquisition spend? What's the business value that we're delivering? What's our retention rate? What's churn? Like those are things that we've spent 5 years doing at Beamable, because we have worked with this very challenging customer base. Game developers, by the way, like they're very choosy. Their risk profile is also really high because, hit rates on games isn't super high. They want to make sure they're with partners that are going to be around long term. They want partners that are going to support them. So there's a lot of trust that you have to prove to this market. So our belief has always been that, we know gaming really well. We know what it's like to build a game. I built Game of Thrones game, Star Trek game, Walking Dead game. I shipped games to 20 million players. So like when people talk about building a game, I know all the pain as well as the joys of like that whole long development process, getting to the road, and then launching and scaling. Like I've lived through that with several games now. So, I understand what that's like, and we understand how to deliver a development framework that helps them get to market faster. So I'm also a believer in like dense networks. Like we want customers that are alike in certain ways or adjacent, talking to each other and helping to boost us as a platform. Like a lot of the people building on Beamable today, now that we've been around like 5 years, some of them shipped a game 2 years ago. They're moved on to their next game studio. They're building another game, and we worked so well there that they've come to us. And our churn has essentially been non-existent. There really is no churn on Beamable. Everybody who's shipped and didn't go out of business, which sadly does happen for some games, but the people who've stayed in business stay on the Beamable platform. So we are proving a story there that we've got high performance, high trust, and we understand the customer base really well. So, and it's frankly a market where there's billions and billions of dollars to spend, because we're talking about targeting not only Web3 games, but this huge Web2 gaming market. Like we're onboarding game developers to Web3 by going after their infrastructure, not by going after their business model. Like Beamable is another way to think of us. But if we can really succeed at scale in the gaming market with a compute platform that serves their needs, yes, there's a ton of other places we can go with Beamable.
I'm just going to apologize to you right now, because you might be getting a lot of DMs from people within the Solana ecosystem that are listening to this and saying, okay, we need to reach out to him. We need to pick his brain. We possibly need to work with them. And I think this is exactly the long-term. I always love to hear the broader scope of what it looks like, because, I think gaming can solve many things throughout any really silos within the Web3 space. And we've talked about many of them, and we've already seen many of them already happen. I think, gamers are always the best guinea pig in a way, right? They're always the ones that are very curious, and they're always the ones that are very much willing to find or discover within the game or whatever that game is to, hey, how do I enhance my experience? And a lot of the time it's the technology behind that is helping them enhance that, and they're willing to discover that. So shout out to you and shout out to your team. Big weeks coming ahead of you. I know that we're right here at the top of our time. I know you have a crazy schedule today. You have several live streams going, so I appreciate you even taking some time today. But I gotta say, the last thing, what's that final message that we want to be able to harp to partners to send you the DM? What do you want partners to send you a DM today saying? How easy does the tee up need to be?
Look, if you're building a game, we always want to talk to you. So doors always open for a game developer looking to make their life easier. The thing that's right in front of us, though, is how can we all support these game developers to have better pricing, have more reliability, have an open ecosystem that they can build upon. And that's what Beamable is building with a compute capital market application for the gaming market. Initially, as we've talked about, goes to many other verticals after that. But the token launch right around the corner. You can just go to my X feed. You can't miss it. Go to Beamable Network. You can't miss it there. And we're going to be sharing a lot more information around that even today. Like every day, we'll be putting information out there about it. So love you to participate.
Compute capital markets. And you guys are teaming up with Metaplex. Good friends, good giants in this space. Awesome. Really, really excited about the genesis and everything that they've been building. So I think make sure everyone, I don't care what you got going on. If you got a date, you got a special like one-on-one, whatever it is, you need to make sure you tell them, look, the alpha, it's very easy. We're going to be watching Beamable Network, Metaplex. They're teaming up November 6th. Definitely everybody, all eyes, not financial advice, of course. But you know what? We can only lead the horse to the water, right? There's always that saying, you can only lead the horse to the water. That's all we could do. John, appreciate your time. Appreciate once you coming on, and we'll be watching, we'll be supporting, and we'll be here to help.
Thanks, Jorge. It's fun as always.